Hello, my name's Jo Bennett and I'm the Community Care Manager for the Australian Regional and Remote Community Services here in the Northern Territory. I'd like to start with acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land in which I live and work, the Larrakia mob, who take in the Darwin area and surround. I've been asked to address shortages of services in regional and remote areas as people age, and I'm primarily going to be focusing on the Northern Territory context. In the Territory, about 50% of the population live in remote and very remote locations, and while that the Territory has 1% of the population, it also has 27% of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population as well. The Northern Territory is the highest growth territory or capital in Australia for the population aged 65 and over. And any night between 20 and 40 Territorians occupy hospital beds due to the lack of available residential care options available. And sometimes that can be up for 2 years or more. 39% of the Northern Territory aged care population is made up by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And all aged care recipients in the Northern Territory are considered to be living in regional, remote or very remote areas. There are multiple barriers to accessing services as you age in regional and remote areas. And some of those are the lack of aged care services that are available in the communities where people live, and forcing Territorians to move long distances away from their family and their communities. There are limited aged care services. There are multiple cultural factors and the sheer distance that needs to be travelled to access these communities adds to a culmination of an unmet need here in the Territory. The viability and sustainability of services due to high costs of providing care in these remote areas, lack of infrastructure and services in the regional and remote areas provide an additional complexity. The complex cultural norms, family hierarchies, and English as second or third language create additional challenges that are not common in other jurisdictions. The poor social determinants of health, housing and infrastructure, things like electricity and environmental conditions like septic overcrowding have a huge impact on the people who choose to live in these communities. There are limited access to GPs and special services, acute care, palliative care services within the remote settings, and combine that with fractured and siloed systems increases the complexity. There is a significant difficulty in attracting and retaining qualified staff who are experienced and who are also prepared to live in remote and regional areas. It's also difficult to provide support to local Aboriginal health workers and provide training and opportunities for them to provide care in communities. There's a lack of suitable accommodation for staff. They live in socially isolated communities, and for large parts of the year they are seasonally cut off to other areas, and so the only way in and out is by flight, which is expensive. In identifying the barriers, there are also a number of opportunities present as well. And I think that the need to develop a culturally sensitive, trauma-informed, strengths-based model of care is essential, and it's effective for all people. I think that there needs to be a better understanding of forgotten Australians in the Territory. They're a population group that are not known or talked about, and there are no ways to identify them in the service system currently, and certainly let alone talking about the specific needs to provide appropriate care for them either aren't there. I think that it's really important to find the sustainable solutions to some of the workforce issues in regional and remote areas, and I think that there needs to be a strengthening of the aged care sector to create a aged care as an occupation of choice, not as an occupational of last choice. So there's some of the issues, and thank you for your time.
Hello, I'm Philippa White, the Director of Tuart Place, here on Wodjuk Noongar land in Fremantle, Western Australia. Tuart Place is a resource service for care leavers, and most of our participants and clients are older people, so eligible for aged care, and many are going through the National Redress Scheme. So typically people who come to Tuart Place who are going through the Redress Scheme were removed from their parents as children, always under some kind of traumatic experience. Then they were taken to foster care or large orphanages or missions, where they experienced further trauma and serious abuse. For obvious reasons, redress payments aren't considered to be taxable income or an asset, except in the assessment of assets for aged care, for residential aged care. So this can make a big difference. For example, Eric, who was paying, he lives in residential aged care, he wasn't paying any fees, but after he got his redress payment, he was liable to pay $17,000 a year, which is just outrageous. And understandably, Eric and his family are very distressed about that. We always advise people to seek advice and assistance on this. No More Legal Service is the free legal service attached to the redress scheme, so they're a really good source of information. And also, No More are advocating on this issue at a broader level, because the problem is that when the redress bill was introduced, the Aged Care Act wasn't updated. So we need the law to change so that this really unacceptable situation is made different. Please, if you can, add your voice to this cause.
I'm Sabrina. As a child, I spent time in Parkerville Children's Home, Wansley, and I was at several places that were foster care, and that was organised by the Churches of Christ in Western Australia. They call me a care leaver. I chose to tell no one of my childhood life. It started in school, where I didn't even tell my friends that I didn't have a mother. I lived with that for 50 years. And then I finally heard about counselling. I went to many people. I was searching for something that would quiet my mind, still my body from the trauma of what happened back as a youth. At the time Redress WA came out, I was seeing a clinical psychologist, paying a lot of money. She helped me, even though I was an angry child having to write things that I didn't know who was going to read, who was going to believe me. I was 50 and I'd never even told the story to anyone. And here I am putting it on paper for someone to read that I didn't even know. It was my counsellor that encouraged, and took a year and a half before I even said yes, I would do this. I had nightmares, and it took me months and months to write anything on a piece of paper, let alone fill in the form. It's not a fun thing to do. People just don't do it because they're going to get some money out of it, because they won't do it. It's too painful. And the thing is, the pain has gone on for the years, not just at this moment filling in a form. So if I do get a payment, you're never going to pay me back for what I lost, that I couldn't give to my children because I wasn't whole at that time. Oh, that's pretty emotional. Well, that's the truth, because that's what I've lived with. So now I'm 71, and the thought of me having to go into care as an aged person is just another nightmare on its own. If I do qualify for any payment, to know that if I have to go into care, you're going to take it off me anyway. Why are you giving it to me in the first place? This is a terrible situation to be looking at for everybody that's in this position. It's unfair. It's greedy on somebody's behalf. And you're just demeaning why we even applied for the National Redress Scheme.
Hi, my name is Meg Schwartz and I'm the Project Coordinator for Helping Hand Aged Care's Real Care the Second Time Around project. I also identify as a Forgotten Australian. My brief presentation today is called A Co-Design Framework, Nothing About Us Without Us. Real Care is a Commonwealth-funded project which aims to respond to the aged care needs of Forgotten Australians care leavers. Our partners are Flinders University and Relationships Australia's South Australia, and we have a co-design expert panel of up to 16 people who identify as Forgotten Australians care leavers. And this is a picture of our co-design expert panel at a project update meeting last year. So what is co-design and why is it so important in the words of a Forgotten Australian? Co-design is about deeply engaging people who need to be heard and probably feel like they've never been heard. So projects not informed by people like us, Forgotten Australians, with first-hand knowledge are usually destined to fail. Our co-design framework for the Real Care the Second Time Around project included 6 main stages. Stage 1, which is our first forum, was readiness to work together. And this is where we gauged the commitment and interest of the group and also established many of the group norms. Stage 2, which was also at the first forum, was developing a shared understanding. And this is where we provided information to the panel about the project, about the problem, about the issues, and we also focused on reinforcing the shared history about Forgotten Australians, and that was really important for supporting team building. Stage 3 was about identifying what we could do together, and that was about identifying the priorities for the project, which were the online training, the workshops, resources, intake and assessment processes, and also about raising awareness about the barriers for Forgotten Australians to accessing care. It was also about reinforcing the shared decision making and also that we were all working towards the same goal. Stage 4 was co-designing agreed priorities, and this was important to reinforce the priorities that had been identified, and it helped the group remain focused. So stage 5 was implementing agreed priorities, and this was the developmental stage, so this was developing all the resources and the e-training for the project. Stage 6 was about reviewing progress, and this was about where we evaluated achievements, what could be improved upon, and the learnings through the whole project. We also celebrated our successes. These are the 6 stages of the project all combined. There were and always are multiple challenges for co-design projects that encompass diverse people, and particularly people from complex childhood trauma. And here are some of the questions that we asked ourselves pre and during the co-design process. And a key question for us was, how do you develop a co-design team when people may not have been encouraged as children to identify as a cohesive group? Spending your childhood with 100 plus other children in an orphanage competing for essentials is not conducive to building strong team skills in adulthood. So focusing on team building skills throughout the whole co-design process was very important for us. Testimonials from the co-design expert panel, one in particular at the bottom, I think I could advocate for myself now with all the information that I have, I think is a testimony to a co-design project that did work quite well. Research reports and documents that we referred to during the whole process. Thank you for listening. If anyone would like to get in contact with us about the Real Care the Second Time Around project and our e-training, working with aged care clients who experience childhood trauma in care, please do so. My contact details are here. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute some insights to this National Roundtable session on ageing issues for forgotten Australians. And my name is Sharon Dutton. I'm the Senior Practitioner in the Counselling and Support Services here in Relationships Australia in Launceston. So it's my privilege to work one-on-one with many forgotten Australians. And I have actually taken the opportunity in the last couple of days of speaking with 3 of them who were really keen for their experiences to be shared with you, obviously de-identified, for this session. 2 out of the 3 people that I spoke to have actually had some really traumatising experiences of being admitted to hospital. And it's in that context that they spoke to me about their concerns about being part of institutionalised aged care in the future. So one of the forgotten Australians who had this experience was actually admitted to a regional hospital for a foot amputation, or part of a foot to be amputated from a physical health issue. And at the time he found that the dormitory style accommodation in the regional hospital really brought back to him all of the triggers that had been part of his experience of abuse in the institutional boys' home that he'd lived in as a child. And that was incredibly problematic for him. When he tried to voice it with hospital staff, he was told basically by some nursing staff, you know, don't be such a princess, everyone wants their own room, surely you can deal with this, you're a big boy. And he really did not feel heard, respected, or that his issue was really treated with enough seriousness, because this particular fellow was actually acutely suicidal when he was triggered back to the horrible memories of his abuse. And it really took my intervention with him and me encouraging him to take this up with the hospital administrator for him to be moved to a single room. So that was a really stark experience, I think, for him and for me, when I understood the implications of that for him and many others like him in terms of moving into institutional aged care. One of the other forgotten Australians I spoke to recently about this actually had their partner go in for surgery to one of the hospitals in Tasmania, and she again had memories of institutional abuse triggered by the dormitory setup, and had not to that time been moved into a single room, had not really been listened to at all. As I discussed it with him, he said that his experience of being institutionalised was actually in a single room, so he's not sure how that would work for him either. But he spoke to me about what he would need. He said he would need to have staff that were well trained, that listened to him, that actually were concerned about his needs and would do what they said they would do, would be trustworthy, which is basically, I guess, the tenet of trauma-informed care that we always abide by in terms of our contact with forgotten Australians. He himself had some issues with the public trustees and their use of wills, power of attorney, the power that they wielded potentially in his life, given, I suppose, stepping in and doing things in other people's lives that he knew about around the end of life arrangements and moving out of your own home, moving into residential aged care. He was very concerned about how that would impact him. And the third forgotten Australian I spoke to voiced concern in all of those areas, but mainly was also concerned for there to be more support for ageing in your own home rather than being shunted off, as she put it, to an institution where, no matter how pleasant or friendly the home may appear, that memory of their helplessness in the face of ill treatment would just trigger complete terror. So they're the basic understandings that I've been given, and my experience with this client group absolutely endorses the need for institutions to work with them and their families to hear their fears and to put measures in place to counter them as much as possible in a trauma-informed way. Thank you.
The chair of the Alliance for Forgotten Australians, and I'm also a forgotten Australian myself. I was taken from my family at 14 months and spent the next 15 years in care, and I use that term very lightly. I want to talk today about the lack of data collection on us as a group, given that there were over 500,000 forgotten Australians, and most people don't know who we are, where we belong, how we fit into this world. And to be honest, we don't either in many cases. For many years, the Alliance worked with ABS to try and get us on the census form, so we would know and governments would know how we're surviving, where we're living, what pockets of places across the country have many forgotten Australians, and often they're the more rural areas for many reasons: cheaper accommodation, people don't like other people, they find it difficult to mix in society because that's not something we did as children, we were kept from society. We worked with the ABS for quite a few years, and we thought we were getting very close to getting a data collection by them on the census form. But after this and to our shock, we got an email from them saying that they thought it would be too traumatic for people to read that question on the census form, and that was the end of that work. No explanation, no arguments were entered into. That was where we ended. And me, being cynical, I suppose, think the government really want to know who we are and how big we are and the impact that this terrible childhood that many of us lived have inflicted on the adults. You don't get over a really terrible childhood. You live with it for the rest of your life. Many of our people live in, or don't live at all really, they just exist in homelessness. Many are in jail because that's what they recognise, that's how they grew up. Many struggle for the rest of their lives, and I just feel that we are well and truly forgotten. The Senate inquiry gave us the name Forgotten Australians, and I believe that's what we are, or ignored Australians. The data that we didn't get through the ABS is really important. As I think I said, most people have no idea about Forgotten Australians. The fear of going back into an institution at the end of their life is horrendous. That's how we grew up. We didn't like it the first time around, so we certainly won't like it the second. Our health needs were not taken care of when we were in care, again, that word. So many of us suffer from early onset ageing because of the lack of nutrition, the lack of love, the lack of care as children. So, but that it's not something that anyone recognises unless we can get the data to back this up. I feel we're, after 20 odd years of fighting this fight, I don't know how far we've come and how much understanding out there in society, in the health area, in the aged care area, there really is. My understanding is there's very little still.
Hello everyone, really pleased to be here at the first ever inaugural Aged Care Forum, talking about the aged care needs for Forgotten Australians and care leavers. My name's Yvonne Porter, and I'm the manager at Wattle Place, which is support service for Forgotten Australians and care leavers across New South Wales and the ACT regions. I'm joining from Darug lands in New South Wales, particularly Parramatta, which is the Burramattagal people. I'll pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal people viewing or present in rooms today. I want to acknowledge that we're standing on Aboriginal lands that were never ceded and always were Aboriginal lands and always will be. So navigating the aged care and home care sector for Forgotten Australians is a really challenging space. It's challenging for people who haven't had a care history background, but it's a particularly challenging space because there's the idea of giving up agency and autonomy and a fear about being reinstitutionalised for Forgotten Australians that comes to the fore when thinking about aged care. There's also the power imbalance that comes for people, or the fear of not being in control when home care becomes necessary in their own homes and inviting strangers in. Our Forgotten Australian community here in Wattle Place are fiercely independent and are very strong people who don't like to ask for help. So aged care navigation is important to assist them to know what they can ask for, to make it okay to ask for assistance and to seek that assistance, and also to introduce the services and the different parts of the sector that they might not be aware of. when talking with people around aged care, we have learned as a service, because we're not experts in aged care, little things like if someone's got an NDIS package, it may actually be better to continue the NDIS package and talk to aged care about what can supplement that, rather than giving up the NDIS package and pursue an aged care package. So navigation in that space is so critically important that our community don't miss out on what's available to them to support them as they age. So over the last little while, our government have supported and funded a trial of care navigators across the country, and just recently introduced care navigators specifically for forgotten Australians and care leavers with a pilot in Queensland and West Australia. My understanding is those projects are small and part-time, and it's great to have a pilot, but what it means then is that the care navigation needs older forgotten Australians and care leavers continues to be something that services like ours need to help people navigate, or to try and learn more around aged care, which of course we do because we want to support our community. But what it means is that we don't have the expert knowledge. The benefit of having these trial sites is that we will gain more knowledge around aged care navigation, around what's available for people, and we know that the Queensland and West Australian pilots will share that information across, and we're so looking forward to taking on the learnings from those projects, including things like how people pick them up, how people engage with them, how much time is required to engage people in the aged care conversation. As mentioned previously, the concept of aged care for people and the fear of reinstitutionalisation, it needs to be carefully supported. So aged care navigation, I anticipate that time will take longer for navigators to work through. So really hopeful to learn those learnings and be able to put forward cases as to why the numbers of forgotten Australians across the whole country, but our particular focus here in New South Wales and across the ACT, with the numbers of people who have been in care and are leaving care now, continue to escalate. And we know that people who were in care often age faster, have aging needs that mean that they have health needs that require intervention earlier. So the learnings will be really critical for putting forward understanding to people who make decisions in the aged care space around supporting forgotten Australians as they age and supporting their needs. We understand from 2023 that the aged care navigation pilots will morph into a new program called Aged Care Finders, and that's going to be greatly expanded. So as I think we understand there's going to be around 500 positions for that. With the additional needs of people who were in care as children, our forgotten Australians, we think it's really of critical importance that there is a strong commitment and allocation of care finders to be specifically targeting their skill base and their knowledge base, their practice based in trauma-informed care to support forgotten Australians, a significant portion allocated for that. And along with that, I would strongly suggest that all of the forgotten Australian services that are existing and on the ground are well placed to understand the needs of the community and understand the fears and the challenges in navigating aged care for our communities. So it would be a high allocation of those 500 places be targeted towards the vulnerable groups that we support here at Wattle Place. Also that all of those care finders have some understanding and education around the needs of forgotten Australians as they age. So if they do have someone that they're supporting to find their way through aged care, that one, they can support them adequately and not be put off by someone's responses to triggers, and also know where to refer on as well to get further supports for that person that they're speaking with. What we know, there's a conservative estimation of around 500,000 people were in care who are considered to be forgotten Australians, who are reaching an age that they're going to be needing access to aged care. And with those numbers increasing, the knowledge base of the aged care sector needs to increase along with that and get better. We do think that the needs of Australians and care leavers are best served by having services that have experience and specialised skills and knowledge in supporting these communities. So thinking about the number of forgotten Australians that are moving into needing to access aged care, we would advocate strongly that at least a ratio of 1 in 50 of those care finder places are allocated for forgotten Australians. It's really critical that that is considered to be their needs. They have additional vulnerabilities because of their time in care. But there's also another consideration in that there's intersections throughout all of the vulnerable groups that the Aged Care Act covers that forgotten Australians also straddle. Many of our people that are part of our community here at Wattle Place are also veterans. They've also been part of stolen generations. They've also been impacted by forced adoption practices. People also have disability who were in care as children. So the client group that we're talking about, the forgotten Australians, the community desperately need people to hear that they have additional needs. They are important and they need to be considered as important when allocating places. What we've always said here at Wattle Place, and I know every other forgotten Australian support service around the country, takes a really firmly held view that if our country, if our policies, if our systems get the care needs right for forgotten Australians, we get the care needs right for everyone. It's a simple baseline. Take care of those people with the additional needs, the best that you can, and everyone's needs get met.
Hello, I'm Mal Causer, and in my role as aged care project worker at Lotus Place, which is part of MICA projects in Queensland, I've been doing a fair bit of networking with aged care services and aged care assessors and hospital-based workers. I've come across two issues. One is the lack of knowledge and understanding about forgotten Australians and the impact that their childhood experiences have had on them. And hopefully this forum will go some way to addressing that issue. The second is that people aren't being asked if they have a history of out-of-home care as children. And one of the reasons for this is that workers aren't sure how to approach the question, because they're worried about causing people distress. So we've asked some forgotten Australians, and here are their responses.
I wouldn't be at all worried about having to tell of my history, but not specific. Really an insight into what I have experienced in my childhood. And they will realise that it's very important for them to understand this because of the person I am.
Do you think it'd be all right if I said, were you ever away from your family as a child? Do you think that's the best way to ask it?
Yes, I think that's easier to handle. It would be up to me how I answered that question. But I think it's vital that the question is asked. You need to steer right away from them having to give the reason for the out-of-home care.
Yep.
Unless they offer.
I think they should do it really carefully, because some people are still ashamed. You know, they think they're still at fault for them being in that place in the first place. You know, and I think, you know, some people will answer you straight away, some people won't, because they've still got that bottom of being scared of authority. So it's a careful thing, you know, when you just talk to them, they give them the opportunity, the choice whether they want to do it or not.
Hi, my name's Pierre, and I'm proud to be called a forgotten Australian, because that's the only life I know. Now that I'm getting the full story of what happened, I'm not ashamed to sort of fight for my rights. If anyone wants to sort of ask about such a situation, for me, just to be direct, and I'll give a direct answer. Simple as that.